I'm begging you, because it's not easy. You don't know the pain. You don't know the suffering. You don't know how I cry. My tears will catch them. My tears will catch them.
Shall we bow down our heads and let us pray? Mighty and everlasting Father, the creator of heaven and earth.
As Shiji is buried, Brian's body is still held in the morgue 2 months after his death. The family want an independent pathologist's report, but are initially denied access to the body. They are also denied access to his medical records and only get these after going to the High Court.
Here we have a situation where a man's died and that man's got family, and a family is trying its best to look after its best interests, to make sure that things are done properly. And rather than the state engaging in some kind of partnership with that family and say, okay, we understand you're grieving, this is happening to you, how can we actually assist you in this process? What we have is the state blocking the process consistently all the way down.
We had to make a decision as a family. Do we bury him now that we've actually got access back to his body, with his brain or without his brain? In the end, we had to go ahead and bury him with, as far as I'm concerned, the essential part of him missing, because they still kept his brain for further investigation.
December 1995, 4 months after Brian is buried, Wayne Douglas is arrested for burglary. Witnesses see police repeatedly hitting him with batons. Wayne later dies in Brixton Police Station.
Douglas! It makes me sad to be out here again tonight, when we think about it and recognize that the police have a plan for us black people. On the 16th of December last year, them killed Shiji Lapite over in Stoke Newington. On the 8th of May this year, they killed my brother, and we're still waiting for our results. And way down in December, they killed another brother, Wayne Douglas. Less than 12 months, them killed 3 black men. No police being arrested, no police being suspended, no police being charged. I tell you, they have a plan for us.
Lots of people took the view that it was Brian Douglas' family and Brian died in May, and their family has been cooperative, taking it all the way through the judicial process, and they had or were getting nothing from that process. Well, if that don't throw doubt in anybody's minds about the potential outcome of another black guy dying in police custody, well, I don't know what else.
The police right now are telling us that we should not march. That is why we have to march.
Obviously, it led to a catastrophe, really, in terms of shops being broken, cars being broken. But it clearly got the message home, if you like, because in a sense, none of our demonstrations hit the front page of the paper quite to that extent. So it almost seems that if you're going to be listened to, you have to go and break up and burn something down or something.
With any campaign where you have a death in custody, there's always lots of rumours and myths and spoilers. The last 3 or 4 deaths in police custody, within days of their death, you begin to hear negative things about them. Either they were mentally ill, they were drug dealers, they're criminals, and automatically that cuts off the sympathy. And I think the police do that. That's a purposeful strategy on their part to focus on all these so-called negative elements, whether they're proven or not. And in a way, in Shiji's case, it didn't matter whether the drugs were on him or not. As soon as they were linked to his name, he became the Nigerian drug dealer, as opposed to the Nigerian father of 2 or the Nigerian asylum seeker. And that was it. Media interest was pretty much shut down.
Olamide waits to find out how her husband died. The police complete their internal investigation. The Crown Prosecution Service, who are responsible for taking legal action, decide not to prosecute Paul Wright and Andrew McCullum, the 2 officers involved in Shiji's death. The family is denied access to information from the investigation and are forced to wait for the inquest to find out what happened. Wright and McCullum arrive. They are represented by lawyers and barristers paid for by the Police Federation. Until now, the officers have declined to answer any questions on the incident. The 2 officers give their statements. They say that they followed Shiji by car as he walked down the street, that he was acting suspiciously and placed something near a tree. They claimed they found crack cocaine where Shiji had stopped. They arrested Shiji, who resisted them.
On the officer's account, one of them grabbed Shiji by the neck while the other is struggling to bring him down to the ground, and eventually all three end up on the ground, with Shiji either face down or on his side, with one officer still around his neck in one way or another.
Shiji was presented as almost a stereotypical way in which any black man who's ever been killed in custody has been presented. It was as if they just read the file and said, that's what we're going to do. I remember one officer said he was the biggest, strongest, most violent black man he'd ever come across. And then a few minutes later, we had the Home Office pathologist saying that actually he was 5'10" and medium build, whereas the officers had described him as 6'1" and this kind of ferocious animal.
One of the officers describes kicking Shiji in the head as hard as he could to try and free his brother officer from the stranglehold. And of course, throughout, on and off, Shiji's neck itself is in the neck lock applied by one of these officers.
I remember one of the key witnesses said that he was upstairs in his room and he'd heard these terrible screams, and those were his words, as if someone was being really hurt. And he'd run downstairs in a panic, and he said he saw a black man being carried into the back of the van, and he said his head was lolling around, and it seemed to him from that point that the man was dead.
Upon the post-mortem examination of Shiji's body, some 40-odd areas of injuries were found, from head to toe. The significant areas of injury being crushed bones at the front of the neck around the voice box, and bruises to his back.
The suggestion was that he'd been punched and kicked and pulled for quite a period of time. The officers said that they had done that because he was so violent and it was in self-defense.
The most serious injury found on either officer was the bite mark on one officer around the shoulder. That was the officer who had held Shiji in a neck lock, and you would think that the bite mark was at the place where one would expect if Shiji had been struggling for life in the last few moments of the neck lock. And the other officer had a scratch at the tip of a fingertip.
I felt bitter about it. I felt really, really bitter about it because nobody was there with them. It was late in the night, and only these two policemen can really tell us what happened. But they weren't telling the truth. Everybody knew they weren't telling the truth.
The inquest jury retires to consider the evidence. Shiji's family want a verdict of unlawful killing so that Wright and McCullum will be prosecuted.
We just literally stepped outside, and I remember talking to Olamide and some of the other press there, and they called us back in. It was kind of been more than 20, 25, half an hour at the most. We were saying, oh God, it's too quick, it's too quick. They've definitely gone against us. They would have, because we felt that for an unlawful killing verdict, they'd really have to argue it out. And then they stood up and said it was a unanimous verdict of unlawful killing.
I thank Almighty God and also thank all the legal representatives, the campaigners, families and friends. Although this week has been very traumatic for me and my family, having sat in court and heard for the first time after 1 year how my husband was killed. I heard how the officers kicked him in the head twice, as hard as they could, how they beat and killed him under 30 minutes. At this junction, I am relieved that my children are going to grow up to learn that the father was unlawfully killed by the police.